Welcome to this walkthrough of paper 2 question 2, which is the summary and inference question. So firstly, let's remind ourselves of the question. It tells us here that you need to refer to source A and source B for this question. That means you need to talk about both sources within your response. Both writers are accompanied by another person on their adventure, Simon in source A and Marius in source B. Use details from both sources to write a summary of what you understand the differences between the two companions, Simon and Marius. So just a reminder for us, a summary is a paraphrased retelling, which means you're making the text shorter than the original. And we're looking here at the differences between Simon and Marius. Now this question you would want to spend 10 minutes responding to in total, and you're looking at writing 2 to 3 SQI plus SQI paragraphs. Okay, and SQI stands for statement, quotation, inference. The plus equals a comparison, and then statement, quotation, and inference. So before we can obviously answer this question, we need to make sure that we've read both texts. And my suggestion here would be that you read the text, firstly source A, and you highlight anything you learn about Simon at this point, and then you reread source B and highlight anything you learn about Marius. The coal was exposed and windy. Directly beneath us, the glacier we had walked up 5 days ago curved away toward the crevices, which led to base camp, nearly 3,000 feet below us. It would take many long lowerings, but it was all downhill, and we had lost the sense of hopelessness that had invaded us on the ice cliff. "What time is it?" Simon asked. "Just gone 4. We don't have much time, do we?" I could see him weighing up the possibilities. I wanted to carry on down, but it was Simon's decision. I waited for him to make up his mind. So I'm just going to highlight here that it was Simon's decision. So this makes Simon responsible for life or death. "I think we should keep going," he said at last. Simon let me slide faster than I had expected, and despite my cries of alarm and pain, he had kept the pace of descent going. So these are some key things that we learn about them. So he'd kept the pace of the descent going. So this also tells us that he seems to have a sense of being in charge. I stopped shouting to him after 50 feet. The rising wind and continuous avalanches drowned out all communications. Instead, I concentrated on keeping my leg clear of the snow. It was an impossible task. Despite lying on my good leg, the right boot snagged in the snow as the weight of my body pushed down. Each abrupt jerk caused searing pain in my knee. I sobbed and gasped and swore at the snow and the cold, and most of all at Simon. At the changeover point, I hopped onto my left leg, trying to think the pain away. It ebbed slowly, leaving a dreadful throbbing ache and a leaden tiredness. The tugs came again far too soon, and carelessly I slumped against the rope and let myself go. The drop went on until I could bear it no longer, yet there was nothing that I could do to bring the agony to an end. Howling and screaming for Simon to stop achieved nothing. The blame had to lie somewhere, so I swore Simon's character to the devil. The terrible sliding stopped, and I hung silently against the slope. 3 faint tugs trembled the taut rope, and I hopped up onto my leg. A wave of nausea and pain swept over me. I was glad of the freezing blast of snow biting into my face. My head cleared as I waited for the burning to subside from my knee. Several times I had felt it twist sideways when my boot snagged. There would be a flare of agony as the knee kinked back, and parts within the joint seemed to shear past each other with a sickening grisly crunch. I'd barely ceased sobbing before my boots snagged again. At the end of my leg shook uncontrollably. I tried to stop it shaking, but the harder I tried, the more it shook. I pressed my face into the snow, gritted my teeth and waited. At least it eased. Simon had already started to climb down. I looked up but failed to make out where he was. I began digging Simon's belay seat. It was warming work and distracted attention away from my knee. When I looked up again, Simon could be seen descending quickly. So this is telling me that Simon has a level of expertise. So I'm just going to write that. At this rate, we should be down by 9 o'clock, he said cheerfully. And so here, I'm just going to remind myself of that quotation, as I feel that that could be useful in my summary. I hope so, I said. No more. It wouldn't help to harp on about how I felt. Right, let's do it again. He had seated himself in the hole and had the ropes ready for another lowering. You're not hanging around, are you? Nothing to wait for. Come on. So I'm just going to highlight this, and I'm just going to write down that he means business. He was still grinning and his confidence was infectious. So I'm going to highlight this because this tells me that in a difficult situation he is optimistic. Who said one man can't rescue another, I thought. We had changed from climbing to rescue, and the partnership, and that tells me about their relationship, so I'm going to highlight that, had worked just as effectively. We hadn't dwelt on the accident. There had been an element of uncertainty at first, but as soon as we had started to act positively, everything had come together. Okay, ready when you are, I said, lying down on my side again. Slow down a bit this time. You'll have my leg off otherwise. He didn't seem to hear me, for I went down at an even faster pace than before, and the hammering torture began again with a vengeance. My optimism evaporated. So, before I read source B, I'm just going to jot down some notes about source A. So here, I'm just going to do a very quick table. So I'm going to have Simon and Marius here. So, what have I learnt about Simon? I've learnt that Simon is in charge of the situation, that he is an expert. I've learnt as well that he is optimistic. So in this next section I'm going to be looking for things that are different about Marius than they are to Simon. I'm also just going to jot down here that it's a partnership. Okay. I thought you would gather from my last letter that I meant to have a shot at climbing the Medjai, and would be glad to hear it that I had descended safely. Well, I'll tell you, it's awful. I think if I'd known exactly what was before me, I should not have faced it, but unfortunately I did not, and I look back on it now with complete satisfaction, and I look forward to other things with no further apprehension. I left here on Friday, having hired a local guide, Marius. So this is something that to me would be a relevant difference. He's been hired. We walked up to the refuge. I went out to watch the beautiful red sunlight fading from the snow and rocks. The Medjai looked dreadfully forbidding in the dusk. When I came in, I found that Marius had kindly put my rug in a corner of the floor, and what with the straw and my cloak for a pillow, I made myself very comfortable. So here we've got this idea that Marius is perhaps looking after this individual. The night lasted from 8 till 12, but I didn't sleep at all. We got up soon after 12 and I went down to the river and washed a little. It was a perfect night, clear stars and the moon not yet over the hills. We left just as the moon shone into the valley. Marius always went ahead and carried a lantern till we got onto the snow when it was light enough with the moon. So again, we learned something about Marius. At 1:30 we reached the glacier and put on our ropes. It wasn't really cold, though there was an icy little breath of wind. We had about 3 hours up very nice rock. I had been in high spirits, for it was so easy. but before long my hopes were dashed. We had about 2 hours and a half on an awfully difficult rock. There were 2 places where Marius literally pulled me up like a parcel. He has the strength of a bear, and it was absolutely sheer down. The first half hour I gave myself up for lost. It didn't seem possible that I could get up at all, up all that wall without ever making a slip. You see, I had practically never been on a rock before. However, I didn't let on to Marius, and presently it began to seem quite natural to be hanging by my eyelids over an abyss. We stayed on the summit until 11. It was gorgeous, quite cloudless. I went to sleep for half an hour. It's a very long way up, but it's a longer way down, unless you take the way Marius's axe took. The cord by which it was carefully tied to his wrist broke, and it disappeared forever into its space. So here, it feels a little bit like the writer is taking a dig and perhaps suggesting that he's being a bit careless. Here comes the worst place on the whole Magi. Marius vanished, carrying a very long rope, and I waited. Presently I felt a little tug on the rope. "Mademoiselle," cried Marius, calmly, and obediently off I went. There were 2 little humps to hold on to, an overhanging rock, and there was me in mid-air, and Marius round the corner, steadfastly holding the rope tight. Perfectly fearful, I thought at the time, how very well I was climbing, and how odd it was that I should not be afraid. The worst was over then, and the most tedious part was to come. There was no difficulty, but there was also no moment when you had to pay the strictest attention. There was an hour of ice and rock till at least Marius and I found ourselves, with thankfulness, back on the glacier. So here, this idea of Marius being with thankfulness makes us feel that perhaps he's not as confident as Simon. So I'm just going to make a little note there of not as confident, so it'll remind me to add it to my comparison. Last little section then. When I got in, I found everyone in the hotel on the doorstep waiting for me, and the hotel owner let off crackers to my great surprise. I went to bed and knew no more till 6 this morning, when I had 5 cups of tea and read your letters, and then went to sleep again until 10. I'm not really tired, but my shoulders and neck and arms feel rather sore and stiff, and my knees are awfully bruised. So we've read through source B as well now to go with source A, so we just need to add some points of comparison to this section here. So we had Simon, who was clearly in charge, and to an extent we've got Marius, who's also in charge. However, we're looking for points of difference, and so one point of difference here is that he was hired to be in charge. And because he's hired to be in charge, it doesn't really make him an expert, so much as an expert who is responsible for having the other person's life in his hands. So let's just add that here. So responsible for her life. Now, we had Simon down as being optimistic, and we talked about him being quite confident. And obviously one difference we see is that Marius appears to be not as confident. And we also said that between Simon and the narrator there was more of a partnership with regards to the mountain, whereas in this one there's a bit of a power imbalance because Marius is being hired. So Marius hired to be in charge. So we've got our 4 points of comparison now, and we only need to be able to talk about 2 of these in detail to allow us to hit the criteria and score highly for this question. Remember, we are using SQI plus SQI, which is statement quotation inference with a comparison, and then it's statement quotation inference. So let's have a look at how we would turn that into a paragraph. So I'm just going to move this so I've got some space here to write. Okay, so we're going to start by writing our statement with regards to source A, and it doesn't need to be anything groundbreaking. So simply, in source A, Joe and Simon work together in a, and then then just a very quick quotation, partnership, work together in a partnership to make it safely down the mountain. So that would be my statement. In source A, Joe and Simon work together. The partnership would be my quotation, and you'll notice that it's just a short, simple, embedded quotation. And now I need to do my inference. So I need to explain what that word partnership might mean in terms of the relationship that they have. So remember, this isn't a language analysis point, although it is language that I'm obviously making an inference about. So in source A, Joe and Simon work together in a partnership to make it safely down a mountain. This suggests that they work together and demonstrate mutual respect for one another and their skills. So just to reiterate, in source A, Joe and Simon work together. That's my statement. My quotation is partnership, in a partnership to make it safely down the mountain. And then my inference, this suggests that they work together and demonstrate mutual respect for one another and their skills. So now the next section would be to put in a comparison. I need to compare it to source B. So I might say, however, the relationship between the climber in source B and her guide Marius is different, as she hired, and that's a quote, so I'm going to put that in quote marks, hired him as a local guide. And I'm putting local guide in quote marks because that's also taken directly from the text. So now I've got my statement, quotation, inference, then I've got my comparison, however, then I've made my next statement. The relationship between the climber in source B and her guide Marius is different. That's my statement. I've got my quotation, as she hired him as a local guide, and now I need to make my inference. And so this time I'm going to say, so up here I said that it demonstrated mutual respect. What I'm going to be able to do here is say the climber in source B and her guide Marius is different, as she hired him as a local guide, which means she hired him to support her, which means she trusts him to have the knowledge and skills that she lacks to help her achieve her ambitions. So that would be one of the SQI plus SQI paragraphs that you need to do for this question. Your aim in the 10 minutes would be to try and write 2 of those paragraphs, sticking to that idea of statement, quotation, inference, comparison, statement, quotation, inference. Good luck with this question, Year 11.